Pikmin 1 is an iconic entry in the Pikmin franchise. It's the very first Pikmin game, and the levels and enemies have become unforgettable. The enemy layouts are all well thought out and engineered for strategic thinking, but what if we took the planned out layouts of Pikmin 1 and completely jumbled them up, leading to a more unpredictable Pikmin experience? That's what the Pikmin 1 Randomizer sets out to achieve. Enemies and bosses are randomized, so there would normally be a Bulborb, there could be a completely different enemy there. After tackling Pikmin 2 Kaizo, I needed a shorter and more easier to stomach mod to play through, so this will do, but several other people have done this, and I've beaten it before, so let's throw in an extra challenge. We are going to be doing the Pikmin 1 Randomizer, Deathless. If a Pikmin dies, I've got to reset the game and try that day again. Keep in mind, I haven't even done a Deathless run of normal Pikmin 1, so this will certainly be interesting. You're probably expecting Pikmin 2 Lands of Torture, and that is coming at some point, along with a few other mods I intend to review, but you can't make a man play two Kaizo mods that close together. It will break him. For a brief bit of context before we start, the Pikmin 1 Randomizer is made by Minty Mio, a notable figure in the Pikmin modding community. It can be easily activated on emulator by using a cheat code. Just be sure to increase the memory of the emulator console if you try this, unless the game will crash. I can't really review this mod as a game because it is just a randomizer and the results are obviously random, but from a technical perspective this is a great mod and it still receives occasional updates to patch out bugs. And by bugs I don't mean bugs that are extremely common, I mostly mean extremely small quirks and glitches of Pikmin 1 that took years to discover and are really rare. The updates show a great deal of care that have gone into making this a smooth randomizer. Anyways, let's delve into our Deathless run of Pikmin 1 Randomized. Captain Olimar crash lands onto the planet and we have to start off on the tutorial. Usually there are no enemies spawned into the tutorial, but whoopsie doodles, there's been a mix up and there are enemies everywhere. At this point in the game we have barely any Pikmin to deal with them, so usually beating them senseless with Olimar is the way to go. They've really nerfed his punch over the years. He goes through everything like a bulldozer in this game, but in the future games I don't even know why they bothered programming in the punch button. Now the enemies we have to deal with are pretty weak, and this is just day one, so we should be able to do this just fine. Okay, so we are back onto the tutorial, and this time we won't lose any Pikmin. This day is pretty simple and you get to build up a relatively decent army for the next day due to the increased enemy count. This mod also comes pre-bundled with another cheat code that lets you use the pluck phone from Pikmin 2, which is handy for quickly plucking up all the Pikmin. This is actually an unused feature that is programmed into Pikmin 1, and it's pretty nice that we actually get to use it in this randomizer. You might notice on the tutorial the enemies we have been dealing with are all pretty weak. Dwarf Bulborbs, Water Dumples and Sheer Grubs are the only things spawned in instead of, a beady Longlegs in the tutorial. What gives? Am I just lucky? Well, there is actually a method to the mayhem in this mod. Small enemies replace other small enemies, big enemies replace other big enemies, and bosses replace other bosses. That is a pretty oversimplified explanation, but we'll be going into much more detail in the spawning mechanics pretty soon. But to sum it up, the randomizer is only spawning in weaker enemies for the tutorial, leading to a pretty relaxed day. Not a breeze though, as seen earlier. Anyways, we get a total of 46 Pikmin, which lets us collect the anti-deoxin filter. As you can see, the ship parts are randomized too. It would usually be the engine here. It's pretty good to have a heavy ship part spawned in and collected this early, as it means we won't have to deal with it spawning in a difficult position or a puzzle spot later in the game. Logically, the run should be over here because it's explained that Olimar needs the engine to take off with the ship, but somehow he just flies anyways. Anyways, after a bit of turbulence, day 1 is completed. We are out of the impact site and heading into the newest unlocked area, the Forest of Hope. Things are going to start ramping up now as we will have to deal with larger enemies compared to the dwarf Bulborbs of before. When we landed there were a few enemies uncomfortably close to the onion, so I had Olimar slap them silly again just to clear things up. We grow up a few more red Pikmin, break down the gate, flower them up, and we are ready to explore the new area. Oh. Well, it's Pikmin 1's most infamous enemy, the Smoky Prog.
I just don't like it. It thinks it's it. Do you know what I mean? The way it wanders about and that. If it owns the joint.
The Smoky Prog is one of the biggest concerns in a normal run of Pikmin 1 Randomized, and he is even more so in a Deathless run. If you haven't played Pikmin 1 before and don't know what this is, he's a giant glob of gloop that can instantly obliterate Pikmin and he heads straight to your base. I don't even know where he came from in this clip. He doesn't show up anywhere in the previous moments and there didn't look like anywhere he could come from, but when I try to head out the base he just shows up uninvited. Obviously this attempt did not succeed. I did say bosses replace bosses, but when I said bosses, I meant what the game considers a boss. The Smoky Prog, Puffstool, Armored Cambeetle, and Burrowing Snagrets are classed as enemies in the game's code, so instead of replacing bosses in the randomizer, they just replace regular enemies, meaning they have a pretty high chance of showing up. Also, for the Pikmin connoisseurs in the audience, the Candy Bot Buds, Geysers, and Iridescent Flint Beetles don't replace bosses. If you didn't know, they are classed as bosses according to the game's code, but the randomizer doesn't spawn them in instead of bosses because that would be silly. Anyways, back to the Smoky Prog, and this guy, as I said, is a big concern, especially because this is a Deathless run. Fighting this guy in a normal run of vanilla Pikmin 1 is usually as useful as a task as carrying coal to Newcastle, so you will likely be ill-equipped to fight him Deathless. The very next run after losing it to the Smoky Prog, he shows up out of nowhere again. It didn't technically kill the run as I accidentally resetted the day because the start button acts the same as the A button in the pause menu. If I accidentally pause the game and I panic, I'd usually try to use the start button to get out of the pause menu, but because it works as the A button, I'd accidentally do something like reset the day. This killed an attempt that had a really good layout, which wasn't nice. These 3 runs were pretty short-lived, but the 4th one was the successful one for the day, and it's about time we talked about the small enemies. The small enemies might not seem like a concern, but they will be making up a majority of what we will be fighting in this game. The small enemies are all of these enemies shown on screen. This includes non-enemies like Fire Geysers and Pelliposies. Now, because the game swaps the Pelliposies with different enemies, the enemy density is a lot higher in the randomizer, leading to a lot of concern. While none of these small enemies are an issue on their own, they can mix with each other or spawn next to more difficult bigger enemies to create for a relatively frustrating experience. The least threatening of these is the Honey Wisp, who is just purely beneficial and can't attack us. The female sheargrubs and wogpoles are also harmless. The dwarf bulborbs and bulbears are also pretty easy. Hitting them in the back should deal with them immediately. They have a pretty slow attacking speed, so unless the area is clogged and you're distracted, they shouldn't be able to kill a Pikmin. The Iridescent Flint Beetle is interesting. It might seem that interesting because it is usually a harmless enemy, but remember this is the GameCube version of Pikmin 1, so the Pikmin will start automatically following it with no player input. The randomizer can spawn several of these guys at once, and they can basically act as a flashbang while fighting different enemies and make it pretty difficult to organize your squad. They usually aren't a concern in the usual game, but here we will have to keep an eye out for them. Then we have the male sheargrubs and shearwigs, which have a tendency to get used the most. These guys are basically tougher versions of the dwarf bulborbs. You usually can't see them until they burrow out of the ground, and if they grab onto a Pikmin, they temporarily stall off damage until that Pikmin is killed. To save that Pikmin, you have to land a rather precise shot on its back to kill it immediately. These guys are probably the worst of the small enemies in terms of difficulty. They get spawned in so much you will usually become pretty good at hitting them in the back after like 5 minutes of playing this game. The final enemy is the Water Dumple. It can be pretty aggressive, but is dealt with easily by swarming. They are a concern when in a group or if you have a low number of Pikmin. While none of these enemies might have seemed that bad, they appear commonly throughout the randomizer, and we have to deal with them all with no casualties. Basically, every inch of land is a battle zone while playing this. Now that we have that cleared up, we can go back to how day 2 went. The goal is the same here as the normal game: unlock yellow Pikmin, get a few parts, and destroy the bomb wall outside of our base. The randomizer will often have you changing up your usual strategies. For instance, there's a ship part on a ledge that I usually don't collect until the next day, but the game spawned a Mimuta there, which is a completely harmless enemy, so I decided to get it as if I waited for the next day, a more threatening foe could be there. Taking advantage of good spawn layouts when they appear is key to defeating this randomizer. Unfortunately, not every enemy can be a harmless enemy, as seen by a Wally replacing the usual Bulborb. These guys are best dealt with by swarming. They attack by jumping and crushing Pikmin. Swarming them immobilizes them 9 out of 10 times, but if it doesn't, you will need some pretty quick reaction times to get out of there with no deaths. You need to whistle right as they start jumping and immediately get out of there, which can be quite hard to pull off at times. The gate to the Yellow Onion was blocked by the world's most annoying Water Dumple. He would immediately start trying to scare the Pikmin away the second they got anywhere near the gate. I wasted a ridiculous amount of time cowering in fear over him, which was pretty stupid of me because he just got steamrolled anyways. The Yellow Onion also had a bread bug next to it. These guys are not a concern, as unless you are just leaving Pikmin idle in random places, they can't kill any of them. Anyways, having yellow Pikmin allows us to use the power of bomb rocks. These are mainly used to destroy stone walls, but they could potentially come in handy for enemies. We don't need to cultivate that many yellows, as you usually only need around 20 on the field at once, and because we aren't allowed to lose any of them, we don't need to grow an excessive amount. After destroying the stone wall near our base, the day comes to an end. Most of this day was just spent unlocking parts of the area. We were able to collect 2 parts that were close to our base though, which isn't that bad. We are back in the Forest of Hope, and our next goal is to get enough parts to unlock and access the next area. This day also took 4 attempts. The first one was ruined by a burrowing snagret. The Deathless strat is to wait for them to get their heads stuck in the ground and then swarm them to kill them immediately. Now that description might make them sound absolutely pathetic, but they really aren't. It can be really awkward fighting them if there are other enemies around, which there most likely will be, and you need full control of your squad at all times to dodge them. Lose control of a Pikmin for 1 second and they're gone. Alright, maybe the second attempt won't be that bad.
Ah, shit. Here we go again.
I tried to fight him, but some yellow Pikmin did the most majestic front flip that landed him precisely into the poison.
Let's see that again!
You might remember that I briefly classed fire geysers with these small enemies. Well, that means that fire geysers have a chance to be spammed, meaning you usually want to only bring reds to certain locations. I learned that the hard way. This complete shithead walks into water, distracts me, and then causes everyone else to light on fire, and the hazards in Pikmin 1 are so brutal they have to be nerfed in re-releases. It kills Pikmin in a second, and they also scatter around everywhere, not to mention the whistle isn't known for being the most responsive in Pikmin 1. This run got pretty far and was ruined by one guy. If I say what I think about him, this video won't be getting any money either. 4 times seems to be the charm in this mod. Despite us playing Pikmin 1, it feels a lot more like Pikmin 2 because of the Deathless challenge. If you're going to try this randomizer out for yourself, just play the randomizer normally and do not do what I am doing. Only I find enjoyment in doing the most insane Pikmin challenges there are out there. Just play the randomizer like everyone else does if you want to actually enjoy yourself. Anyways, I said doing it Deathless feels like Pikmin 2, and what I meant like that is it plays like how people that don't like Pikmin 2 describe Pikmin 2. You have to be extremely cautious, there's random stuff popping up out of nowhere, and one mistake can ruin a run, with there being less emphasis on time management. Because this is Deathless, I can't afford to try to get a high score, and it's more about staying alive, and there's also a pretty big risk and reward factor here. If I get a good layout, I can try to go for more parts than usual, but that comes with the risk of fucking something up and having to start from scratch on a potentially worse layout. This is probably the most stress I've ever felt like while playing a Pikmin game. It's by far the most amount of punishment you can get from losing a Pikmin. There's this kind of tunnely section with a high enemy density in 2 parts that you are supposed to do on day 2, but I left off for this day. The best way to approach small enemies when they are in massive groups is to try and coax one of them near you and kill them off individually. You probably can't deal with them all at once, so try and split them up when possible. I had another close call with a wally while trying to get apart. That might have not looked like a close call, but trust me it was. This run had a pretty good enemy layout, as one of the bulbs was replaced with a candybot bud, which isn't even an enemy. We were able to collect 3 parts this day, allowing us to get to the next area. I said that this challenge was the most stressed I felt playing Pikmin, but nothing beats the pure dopamine you get from clearing a day and locking in all that progress after a successful run. I'm not looking forward to the Forest Naval. In normal randomized runs, this place already gives me a lot of trouble and usually ends up being the hardest area, so I don't even want to think about doing it Deathless. And as I predicted, this day was not fun. The first thing to know about this area is that it's pretty big. While we could keep track of these small enemies in the Forest of Hope, there are several parts of the Forest Naval that you usually won't even walk on, and in vanilla Pikmin 1 these parts don't have enemies. Due to the randomization, these parts usually do have enemies now, and because your Pikmin will usually carry things through there, if you don't scan them out beforehand, you can easily lose a Pikmin randomly and have to restart. There are also a lot more bigger enemies here than in the Forest of Hope. We only had to deal with 3 big enemies across the 2 days we spent in the Forest of Hope. Here there are 4 big enemies waiting for us at the start of the map. The most common one that would get spawned in was the swooping snitch bug. These guys work very differently in this game compared to future entries. In modern games they only patrol around a very small area, but in this game they can roam around the map freely. They don't kill Pikmin, only planting them in the ground, but they are still a huge hindrance and you'll want to kill them as soon as possible. Another hindrance is the armored cannon beetle. These guys hurl boulders at you and take a good amount of time to defeat. If they are placed in water and you don't have any blues, they can be especially troublesome. I mentioned in my Pikmin 2 Kaizo video that I would zoom in the camera to despawn enemies, and that sometimes work here as well. It would occasionally work, but then there would be other times where I would zoom in the camera just to get a boulder hurled at me anyways. Not to mention, landing the shot into their hole is pretty finicky here, especially because we aren't finding them in an empty circular arena. They're just overall a pretty awkward and difficult enemy for this challenge. Our main goal here is to get some ship parts and collect and grow up a few blue Pikmin, which is easier said than done. I found that the best strategy was to bring a full squad of 100 reds with me at the start of the day, and to not even try multitasking. If I needed to destroy a wall or build a bridge, I would just do it instantly. I didn't want a smaller squad for combat, and I also didn't want any loose Pikmin lying around. Bringing 100 red Pikmin helps deal with fire geysers and also makes some enemies easier. The Bulborb and Bulbears aren't really a concern, as we can deal with them instantly with a full squad. I'm not collecting any of the ship parts that yellows are required for, so they aren't necessary, but we do lose out on breaking down some stone walls near our base that could potentially make our life easier in the upcoming days. On one attempt I had a really good layout, but I thought I was Sumo Haiha and tried to snipe this dwarf bulwark with just one Pikmin and that backfired. In my defense, I had that shit lined up and it literally hit his back, so I don't know how he survived. You can also see from this attempt that the game can spawn in smoky prog eggs. This is good as you can just break them immediately and they are completely harmless. Getting a successful attempt here is a matter of managing all of the enemies and executing your combat perfectly, which is easier said than done. I decided to get 3 parts here, and they are the easiest ones to collect, requiring basic tasks to collect them and not needing to fight any extra bosses or solve any long puzzles. The latter half of this day, which is spent grinding up blues, is the easiest. I did the usual strategy for grinding up any new type of Pikmin, which is to kill any enemies near the onion with Olimar and then collect their corpses. After 7 attempts we finally clear day 4. Considering this wasn't even that much of an action-packed day compared to what the other ship parts in this area require, I'm not looking forward to future attempts at this area. The impact site is always a good place to go when you need to get 100 blue Pikmin, so I decided to go there. The game usually spawns in a lot of pellet posies at the base, but because the game replaces those with randomized enemies, it is an absolute shit show. The entire spawn area is covered in enemies. This is helpful for getting more blue Pikmin, but it can be pretty stressful to deal with, and it took over half the day to clear them all out. It feels like we are doing a tactical invasion here, when normally you would probably spend less than a minute here when you land in the normal game. The actual part that is supposed to be a difficult section is the easiest, as we had to fight one Bulborb to get the ship part. I don't know what I was doing while fighting him, as I just whistle all my Pikmin and stand there for a while. I don't know how I got away with that scot-free, but I did. Anyways, this day was pretty brief and easy, only taking 1 attempt, and now that we have over 100 blue Pikmin, we can take on the rest of these ship parts in basically any order we want to now. I decided to trek back to the Forest Naval for a day to collect some parts that were in the water. Because we killed some enemies here 2 days earlier, it's good to go back as some of the enemies have not respawned yet. It is worth noting that in the regular game the pellet posies respawn on a daily basis, so that means the small enemies respawn on a daily basis as well. This day went good enough, only taking 2 attempts, and the layout was alright. For the parts we were collecting it was good, as the game only really spawned in Mamudas, which as stated earlier are completely harmless. The reason it's only okay is because we were only able to get 2 parts, as the other ones would have been really awkward. The usual puff stool was replaced by an Emperor Bullbax. If you ever see this guy in the Randomizer, the best strategy is to not even attempt him at all. He's the final boss having 30,000 HP, and he is pretty impractical to fight in a normal Randomizer run, let alone a Deathless one. You usually won't even have bombs to deal with him, which are pretty much required to do this fight. And even if you do go out of your way to fight him in the Randomizer run, it's never worth your time. The beady Longlegs was replaced by a puff stool, which would have been great, but the entrance was guarded by an unhittable armored cannonball that was on a ledge. I could have potentially gone that part, but I decided against it, as this layout was already good enough and I wanted to salvage it. Towards the end of the day, I destroyed a stone wall with bomb rocks, which will make the future days here easier. Day 7 was not a fun day, and it took 11 attempts. I had set quite an ambitious goal, that being to collect the remaining 3 parts left in the Forest of Hope and fully finish it off. To do this we would need to go to the latter end of the map and fight 1 or more bosses, get another ship part which was probably the easiest, and then go fight another boss. All the while we will have to fight off several small and big enemies. This was brutal to pull off Deathless. I used a squad of 80 blue Pikmin for water and 20 yellow Pikmin just in case the beady Longlegs spawned as a boss. Well, it turns out yellow Pikmin are pretty bad for the Randomizer, as their high throw completely neuters them in combat against these sheer grubs and dwarf Bulborbs. This is not a concern in vanilla Pikmin 1, as these enemies are pretty uncommon and you usually won't have yellow Pikmin around them. This is vastly different in the Randomizer, as they are the most common enemies everywhere, and being actively bad at fighting them makes yellows a pretty big annoyance, and it's easy to lose a Pikmin if you accidentally try to use them. This is the GameCube version of Pikmin 1, so I can't change what type of Pikmin I am holding with a button, meaning if yellows are at the forefront of my squad and I try to attack an enemy, I will basically be stuck with them. Getting to the first ship part was already a pretty difficult task, and then we actually had to get it. Right, we are at the ledge where the bosses spawn, and look whose theme song is playing. It's the beady Longlegs theme song, so let's bring yellows to deal with the beady Longlegs that is about to be spawned in.
Let's see that again!
The Gulix is a boss you don't even think about ever in a normal Pikmin 1 run, but he's an absolute nightmare in the Randomizer if you don't prepare correctly. The Randomizer uses the beady Longlegs theme song for him, the Emperor Bullbax, and the Gulix. And because both the beady Longlegs and the Gulix don't make themselves visible until you approach them, it's basically a 50-50 on what's going to spawn in. The bubble hazard the Gulix gives Pikmin has the same kill time as fire, that being 1 second, and he will often stun your captain, so the attempt is basically over if you run into him unprepared. However, thankfully this is the only time we ever faced missed him. Also, speaking of the beady longlegs, he never showed up during the entirety of this playthrough. I know he can spawn in, he's done it in attempts I've played in the Randomizer before, but I guess he was just on sick leave for this playthrough or something. The pearly clams also never spawn in, but I'm pretty sure they aren't supposed to. Anyways, to add insult to injury to this attempt, the ship part was inside a Mamuda, so this would have actually been really easy if I foretold the Gulix. I said that the game spawned some things that most people would consider bosses as normal big enemies, but the randomizer does actually put some of the bosses in both groups. The Mamuda is one of these, which is weird, but I'm not going to complain. Another one of these enemies are in both spawn groups is the Smoky Prog, isn't that just great? That makes him one of the most likely things to get spawned in, and that definitely showed in this day because like 70% of my attempts were ruined by him. I was gradually getting better at dealing with him, even getting a fight with him that only had one death, which was caused by some fuck-ass killing and carrying a pole directly through him for no reason. Some of these attempts were ruined by the stupidest things. I think of 10 different ways the game would fuck me over and try to avoid it, only for the game to pull up an 11th one. In this attempt, I do not fail because of the snagrit, do not fail because the water dump was suddenly ambushing me during the snagrit, no, I fail because a puffy blowhog blows a Pikmin really far off screen and he gets eaten by a dwarf bull bear I didn't even know was there. Or this attempt where I did the first half of the day with no flaws, only to lose because a dwarf bull bear ate a Pikmin through a wall. Speaking of the puffy blowhog, he's not really a concern. If he's not near any enemies, he's harmless, and I'd rather have him spawn in than any other enemy. Anyways, I do an attempt and the Schmorky Prog shows up again. Wonderful, I might as well restart the game. But then I fight him anyways, and... not only did I do a Deathless Smoky Prog, he had the ship part, which means I could cut out having to explore a whole half of the map. I was tempted to get the other two ship parts that day, but I knew something like that was not going to happen again, so I just ended the day just to be safe. I killed the Smoky Prog Deathless, so I think I deserve it. While the previous day took 11 attempts, this one only took a solid 1, making it the only other day to only take 1 attempt. I got pretty good luck here. There was only a puffy blowhog in the way of the armored cam beetle, and at the wall there was no cheating pieces of shit. The boss turned out just to be a Mamuda, and he's starting to become my most liked enemy for this mod. Every time I see him, it's been a peaceful experience. Unfortunately, we usually have to kill him when he spawns in anywhere to prevent actually bad enemies from taking his place the next day. The bridge ship part was always going to be easy as it's near no threatening enemies. I used this amazing trick to skip building one of the bridges that was probably slower than just doing it normally. After collecting, we had fully finished the Forest of Hope, being the first major area that was knocked out. We only had 2 more large areas and then the final boss area to go. We unlocked the distant spring all the way back after being the impact site, and now it was time to explore it. I held it off for a while because you usually want to clear it in one fell swoop due to enemy respawns, but now is the time to take it on. The distant spring is already a pretty imposing area in the original game as it's the largest area and there are no clear paths, you have to take it on however you want to. And now it was going to be even more daunting because we don't know what to expect from the enemy spawns. My goal here was to take out the upper half of the map, which might sound like a lot, but there are only around 3 parts spread out there. My main strategy was to take out all of the potentially attempt to ruin enemies first and then go for the parts. This mod also made me very good at taking out the armored cannon beetles. However, my own trick of zooming in the camera to ignore them also came back to bite me in the ass here as well. The boring snaggers were really starting to get on my nerves, just like how they did in the last mod. They always managed to catch me off guard, and they are not the easiest to deal with, especially without any red Pikmin by our side. The winning attempt was much less satisfying than what I wanted. I expected to be able to get 4 parts, but I barely managed to get half of that at only 2 parts. This was because I somehow got into my head that humping the massage machine into the water would be faster than building the bridge and getting red Pikmin to carry it through the fire. This wasn't true, and I quickly realized that after 4 minutes of doing this. I thought I got it far enough into the water, but then these guys went and carried it back onto land. Great. All of this was completely pointless. We didn't even have to go back and get reds, as you can easily just go through the fire geyser, so even if it was faster, it still wouldn't have been worth it. Because of that, we got half of what I wanted to do that day done. This day took 6 attempts, which is around the average amount of attempts, but most of those did take several minutes compared to the previous days, where some lasted only around a minute because of a certain enemy. Day 10 was a surprisingly easy day, only taking 2 attempts, and the first one got pretty far, but it was ruined by the crush glitch. This is a glitch where enemies can cause Pikmin to clip through the floor and die. This has ruined a few attempts, but it wasn't all that common. It only happens on a total of 5 enemies, and they aren't all that frequent compared to the original game, and you can avoid it with bulborbs and bullbears by just manning up and throwing Pikmin at them. I guess I could not count these as deaths, as we didn't really see the Pikmin die, they just disappeared, and it is a random glitch. But that would lead to a rather unsatisfying results screen, and hinges on the idea that my viewers 100% trust my word. Just ignore those 512 dead Pikmin guys, those were crush glitched or whatever it's called, that's why Pikmin 3 is better. I decided to count these as legitimate deaths. I mean, it is a randomizer, so we do have to accept randomly losing Pikmin. I wanted to do the lower bit of the map, but the potential burrowing snaggers there didn't look that fun, and neither did the moonwalking smoky prog, so I just finished off the upper and mid parts of the distant spring.
Let's see that again!
I've also been getting more used to the swooping snitch bugs. While yes, they are annoying, you can kill them easily enough, and they are harmless, plus they can get rid of potentially dangerous enemy spawns. This game also has the best design for them in my opinion. They're all reflective and shiny in the new games, but here they really look like filthy fucking flies, which is exactly what they are. Anyways, this day went well and we collected 4 parts. I didn't even get that lucky with the layout, I just had pretty consistent execution throughout. This day also went pretty good, only taking 3 attempts. The first attempt failed because of a bridge. That's not a joke, the bridge clipped my Pikmin out of bounds and he died. I've gotten pretty far in this run as well, so I was not very happy about this. I also have not brought up the Puffstool or Fiery Blowhog yet, and I'm only bringing up now to talk about how disappointing they were. This is like my 100th time bringing up the Puffstool in this channel, so I'm not going to talk about him, but I think the footage speaks for itself, and I was expecting the Fiery Blowhog to be a threat, but he simply was not. I could quickly destroy him even without red Pikmin. They're only really a nuisance in high numbers, and because the randomizer was hard pressed to spawn in just one of them, they were pretty easy. On the successful attempt at the start of the day, I brought out 100 red Pikmin on a whim, but it turns out that was actually a excellent decision, as the game went from spawning the armored cannonball occasionally to spawning it in every fucking section of the map. Also, for some reason the game just started experiencing lag spikes, which I've never seen Pikmin 1 do, and it never happened again after this day. It wasn't that troublesome, I just thought I'd mention it. But the 3rd time the game spawned in a Mamuda as a boss fight. These guys are basically just a sign of good luck. Most of the attempts they have spawned in on have been successful. Unfortunately, the armored cannonball spam ended up taking a large portion of the day, so we only got 2 parts. This leaves this area with 2 more parts, and I did specifically choose not to attempt them this day, as I knew one of those parts would definitely take up a large amount of time. Now, despite us only have to collect 2 parts, day 12 was pretty rough. The game kept up the armored cannonball spam, which I would not have minded, but he kept getting spawned in the worst possible positions. We land in the area and he gets put up on this tree where I can't hit him, and he's just right outside our base where he can freely chuck boulders at us. I obviously have to reset the game, and immediately after resetting he just gets put up on the exact same fucking tree. The very next reset he isn't on the tree this time, but he's on a platform. We cannot hit him on this platform, and we need to use this platform for a puzzle, so that's also a reset. Now, this was pretty annoying to deal with, but despite some difficulties, we did get off pretty lucky for this day, as the game spawned in a yellow candy pop bud next to the ship part. This ship part requires a puzzle where you change your Pikmin to yellow and then get the part down to get a blue Pikmin. Now, in the usual game, it spawns in yellow and blue candy pop buds so you can change your Pikmin, but because it's randomized, they usually don't spawn in. We got extremely lucky having a yellow candy pop bud spawn right next to the part. If this didn't happen, then the strategy would have been to precisely throw 30 yellow Pikmin onto this platform and then drown them over to the part. This is rather time consuming, especially because I assumed that this part weighed 50 Pikmin, which it didn't. It's usually ideal to save this part for last, as you will just have 30 Pikmin confined to a small cove, and in my case 50. So just getting it as the final part and ending the day makes the rest of the area easier. The other part here was way easier in comparison, there aren't even any enemies spawned in near it. Anyways, with that, the distant spring is fully completed and we now have to finish off the forest naval. This day has all of the same problems we had with our first day here, except now we also have to face off against 2 bosses. My plan was to ignore all the enemies we did not have to fight and just try to get the 2 ship parts as efficiently as possible. I brought 79 red Pikmin for combat, 20 yellows for bombs and the beady longlegs, and 1 blue Pikmin just in case the Gulick showed up. Yellows are still just as bad as they have been for combat. For the first few attempts, the game seemed really keen on replacing the Puffstool with the Emperor Bullblacks. This area does have a good few bomb rocks, so I did actually attempt them just to see what it would be like. I did better than expected, but it would usually all come crashing down towards the end of the fight. I'm not mad that I didn't do them Deathless, because even if I did, it would still be inefficient, as we need those bombs to break down walls. The section that leads to the Puffstool arena is pretty brutal, probably having the highest enemy density in the game. Both you and the enemies can be pushed by other enemies or the Pikmin carrying things, so aiming can be really hard. Also, keeping up the recent trend of armored cannonball spam, the game kept putting them next to the BD Longlegs arena. I would usually choke before having to deal with it, but I would imagine that would have been very annoying to deal with this day. On the successful attempt, a Mamuda replaced the usual Puffstool, giving us a free boss fight. I actually like this enemy more after playing this mod. The BD also got replaced by Puffstool, which led to 2 easy boss fights in a row. I decided to end the day after getting these parts, as the puzzle we need to do for the next 2 parts is pretty long. Day 14 was very rough, probably the worst day we had to deal with in this challenge. The difficulties we had to face on this day were very unique, and the difficulty was like those pattern things clowns pull out of their arms. Every time I thought it was over, it just kept going, and there was a new twist and turn every minute. The first attempt got ruined in a whopping minute by the crushing glitch, but I played on for a small bit as I wanted to see what parts were spawned in. While doing this, I made the discovery that the smoky prog eggs are actually randomized. I always just assumed they would spawn in the smoky prog, but no, they are actually randomized in this mod. There are usually fire geysers in this section, but they are randomized to small enemies, and if I hadn't already lost some Pikmin, this bullshit here would definitely not been appreciated. Anyways, the part in the water weighs 30 Pikmin.
That's good.
And the part that replaces the Libra is the heaviest part in the game at 50 Pikmin.
Ooh, that's bad.
This means we have to bring out 50 yellow Pikmin to collect the part, and as I mentioned earlier, yellow Pikmin aren't exactly great against the most common enemies in the randomizer. Even when they weren't screwing me up in combat, they would do some absolutely ridiculous shit anyways. After a small bit of difficulty, we finally get to the shit far location. The area here is so dense that just throwing all 50 Pikmin up on the ledge will lead to them falling into the water, so we have to tediously split them up. Turns out that the shit part isn't exactly fitting onto that ledge all too well because it's literally pushing Pikmin into the abyss. After several tedious attempts, we finally get the shit part down, and it should be smooth sailing from here. Okay, I thought that actually collecting the ship part would be the easy part, but apparently it doesn't even fit the collision of the map, leading to Pikmin falling out of bounds, and the part just got stuck. It would just keep getting stuck here, and figuring out how to get it through here was really difficult. I tried pushing with Olimar and that just got in the same place. Then I tried going to the next day without saving because Pikmin has kind of a checkpoint system for the ship part locations. If you end the day, the game doesn't put the part exactly where you left it, it will put it in a certain location based on where you left it. Basically, if I end the day, there is a chance that the game would move it past the part where it was getting stuck. It put it exactly into the spot where it gets stuck. Eventually I found that the actual strategy was to throw exactly 50 Pikmin onto the part so nobody would fall off it, and then just hope and pray that it would get through without getting stuck. This did eventually work, but while bringing it to the ship it would just keep getting stuck on bridges, and I couldn't budge it with Olimar as the Pikmin would just refuse to take me anywhere near the bridge for some reason. The only thing you could do about this is just wait there until the Pikmin figure things out. Eventually, after 17 attempts, this day is completed. Getting this one part took so long that we couldn't get the other one, and also robbed us of a nice 15-day finish. Day 15 was certainly a lot less difficult and interesting compared to whatever the fuck was going on yesterday. We had to get the final part of this area, which was around the same location, but we required a much easier puzzle. The ship part looked a little big, so I was already concerned we would have to go through the whole rigmarole again, but it went through just fine, and we have now collected 29 parts that can access the final area. Who died? I just beat the day and someone died. It was because I let the Pikmin collect corpses to grow up their numbers, and they just went through the most dangerous enemy-littered path they could find, ruining the attempt after it was already finished. Attempt 2, get the part and don't get any corpses because kindness clearly gets you nowhere in life. Now we can actually move on to the final area. The The final trial is the last area we have to deal with in this mod, containing only one ship part locked behind a randomized boss fight. For some reason I was playing this entire randomizer with the expectation that this would be the easiest part and that we were just a hop, skip and a jump away from the finish line, but that was not true. This area is pretty hard. It wasn't the hardest thing in the game, but it still was pretty difficult. You got 3 large enemies spawn right beside your base when you start off, which is quite troublesome, and I never got a good combination of enemies. There's also this section here. Usually it would just be fire geysers here, but as we know they get randomized, so it's usually a bundle of enemies. The best solution is to coax them out with Olimar and beat the devil out of them. If you accidentally miss an enemy while doing this, which is pretty easy, then it's highly likely that they will kill a Pikmin, and the iridescent flint beetle can clip red Pikmin out of the section and straight into water. You can't spawn the flint beetles in with Olimar, so you can't really avoid it either. If you clear up the long puzzle without any Pikmin dying, then it's time to face the final boss of the randomizer. You can't see the boss until you actually go up to the gate, so you can't plan around it beforehand, and you just kind of have to deal with the cards you are dealt with. In my case, we had the stationary smoky prog who would also jitter a lot. I could have just bombed them with yellows, and I did try that, but I only brought 3 of them and we were running out of time, so I guess I would have to gain the courage and fight him the real way. Okay, now he decides to move. After several more attempts, we get to face a new final boss again, and this was the successful attempt. The final boss of the randomizer is the exact same stationary smoky prog. I kinda wanted to fight the beady longlegs, to be honest. Anyways, here's the epic fight in all of its entirety. Pretty underwhelming, I know, but with his defeat, the Deathless Randomizer challenge is fully complete, and we cultivated a total of 931 Pikmin. That concludes the Deathless Pikmin 1 Randomizer challenge. I originally only did this mod Deathless because I thought it would add a mild amount of challenge to the randomizer and make the video slightly more interesting. I wasn't expecting it to completely change the experience or add this much difficulty. It was a hard challenge that, despite all of its grievances, I had fun with. I highly recommend you give the randomizer a go, not Deathless of course because that's just cruel, but the default experience is extremely fun. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe for more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next video.